Welcome, everybody. Someone once said there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. That's how we've been feeling at the nation. You're going to hear today from three brilliant correspondents on the legal and political ramifications of the first Trump indictment. We may be back to talk about Georgia and Washington. I don't know about you, but I will say I'm looking forward to this conversation, but I was most excited during the Trump week, so to speak, by events in Wisconsin, the state Supreme Court, in Chicago, the mayoral race, and in Tennessee, the two Justins, showing the power of people in organized motion, something we write about, think about a lot at the nation. So today we're going to hear from extraordinary people who have followed this topic for a long, long time. And I want to just say thank you for your support, for making these conversations happen, for making The Nation magazine, thenation.com. I don't know if you followed the developments at the Texas Observer, a wonderful independent magazine, 67 years old. We're a little older than that, but the state of independent media is a great one in many ways, but tough one. So we count on your support. We thank you for joining us today. We'll be doing more of these. Let us know what you'd like to hear about as well. We're open to that. And this would not be possible without you, keeping independent, non-corporate media alive. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Don Guttenplan, the editor of The Nation, a great ally. We edited the 150th anniversary issue together. He's written a biography of The Nation, and he's keeping The Nation strong, and thenation.com, which I hope you'll visit. So over to Don. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Katrina, for your leadership and for everything that you do. And thank you all for joining us today. Excuse me. I'm going to balance Katrina's ready citation of Lennon with one of Grom's.
Oh, John Lennon.
And that we have three brilliant practitioners here of pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. Chris Lehmann is a former editor of The Baffler and of The New Republic, and the author of The Money Cult, Capitalism, Christianity, and the Unmaking of the American Dream. And he joins us from his study, but he is the Nation's Washington bureau chief. So welcome, Chris. Elie Mystal is the Nation's justice correspondent and the author of the best-selling and absolutely indispensable Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, which, if you don't have, I urge you all to get. Joan Walsh is national affairs correspondent, focused on abortion, right-wing violence, and the rising threats to democracy. She has a terrific piece on the events in Tennessee, and particularly the burgeoning beginnings of a civil rights movement, a new civil rights movement in Nashville, on www.thenation.com this week. And she's the producer of the fascinating documentary, The Sit-In. Harry Belafonte hosts The Tonight Show. So I'm going to kick off with Elie, because we want a legal opinion first, which is, what is this indictment all about? What does it say? What does it allege?
All right, so let's start with the actual documents. It is 34 counts of falsifying business records charged as a Class E felony. What does that mean? Think of it like the speeding ticket of financial crimes, right? It's the thing that they get you for when they don't have anything else to get you for. Alvin Bragg himself said that falsifying business records is the bread and butter of the Manhattan DA's office. That's true, but you can take that one of two ways. One, it's the bread and butter. They do it. It's standard. It's what they do all the time. Two, it's what they do all the time. It's not the kind of high crimes and moral depravity that most people are looking at Trump for. Now, that the charges are falsifying business records as opposed to something more serious has gotten some people in the media confused because of the way Bragg went about getting them from a misdemeanor falsifying business records to a felony falsifying business records, right? To make it into a felony, Bragg has to allege that Trump falsified his business records, messed up his books because of some higher underlying crime. And the higher underlying crime is how we get into all of the talk about conspiracy, the National Enquirer, Karen McDougal, the entire kind of catch and kill scheme, as well as the likely campaign finance laws violations that Trump was probably trying to cover up, saying basically that the hush money to Stormy Daniels was in fact a campaign contribution that Trump did not log correctly, and tax evasion. So like, those are all things that Bragg is alleging to make falsifying business records a felony. He's not actually charging Trump with campaign finance violations, tax fraud, conspiracy, and what have you. And that's significant because that kind of puts us in a situation where Trump is going to have some legitimate legal defenses. Now, when I say legitimate, understand most of the times when I am talking about Trump's legal arguments, I am talking about wackadoodle stuff, right? Like Trump usually does not have a legitimate legal argument. He has only the authoritarian's legal argument that my judges that I handpicked are going to bail me out. This time, he's going to have some legitimate defenses. One, he's going to argue that there was no deeper fraud that he intended to cover up. And the way he can kind of prove that there was no deeper fraud that he intended to cover up is that nobody has charged him with any of these deeper frauds that he allegedly covered up, right? Like, how can you say that I'm trying to cover up campaign finance fraud when nobody has charged me with campaign finance fraud? And it ain't like the federal government hasn't looked, right? He can argue that SDNY looked at the case, the DOJ looked at the case, and they didn't charge him with campaign finance violations. So what was he trying to avoid, right? Like I'm not saying that's a good argument, but I'm saying it's a legitimate one that he will be able to make. The other one that he'll be able to make is that all of these charges, again, 34 felony counts of falsifying business records, don't let the 34 kind of fool you. It's one scheme that he committed 34 times, right? It's like 11 invoices and 10 bad checks, and it's the same kind of offense over and over again. He's going to argue that those offenses fall outside of the statute of limitations. There's a 3-year statute of limitations on tax fraud. There's a 5-year statute of limitations on campaign finance fraud. And most of the allegations that Bragg has are in 2017 or very early 2018, which doesn't quite get you all the way to 2023, unless, and the little like extra juice here is that people remember the period between 2018 and 2023, we also had, like a global pandemic that kind of screwed everything up. And so during that pandemic, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo suspended the statute of limitations for 228 days. Depending on how you legally read that, and there are different ways to legally read that, you could argue that that extends the statute of limitations by 228 days. And really, there are a couple of offenses, right, in late 2017, early 2018, where that extra 228 days might put Bragg under the statute of limitations. So that's a thing that will probably come up. Bragg will also argue that the statute of limitations tolls or pauses while Trump is out of state and unavailable. It's an interesting argument. It's the point of that is to say that basically, like, if you commit a crime in New York and we don't know where you are, the statute pauses. We knew where Trump was like the whole time. And to argue that he was unavailable, that works for the feds, because based on the OLC memo, Robert Mueller couldn't charge a sitting. That never applied at the local level. Bragg or his predecessor, Cy Vance, could have charged Trump with these crimes at any point. So whether or not we can call Trump unavailable while he was president is also a matter of some legal import. So to wrap that all up, Bragg has a very simple charge that is very easy to prove. You'll note at no point did I even suggest that Trump did not falsify his business records in connection with his hush money payments to the actor. Like, we all know that actually happened. So Bragg has a very simple charge. It's a relatively easy charge to prove. We assume that he has all the documents from Michael Cohen to prove it, but there are legitimate legal technicalities that could provide Trump with some options here.
Okay. Wow, Elie, that was brilliant. Thank you. There are a couple of loose ends that I want to pick at before we get into the where might this go question. One is catch and kill. For those of you who only just woke up from suspended animation, does somebody, Joan, do you want to explain catch and kill?
Well, I mean, the layperson's explanation in this context was that the National Enquirer basically paid Karen McDougal a bunch of money, I think $150,000 for her story about her dealings with Trump, only to basically kill it. And I think let her write some fitness story and or some other things, but never reveal the Trump story that she was trying to reveal to someone, and they came up with the money. That's my understanding of how it pertains here.
This was a scheme that the owner of the National Enquirer, the wonderfully I'm not going to go there. Anyway,
Aptly named David Pecker. Is that what you're?
Yes.
But can I just add off top of Joan, like, to be clear, catch and kill itself is not illegal. It's not illegal to pay somebody money for their story to simply to kill the story. Where the illegality potentially comes in is that if somebody is doing catch and kill on your behalf and you're a candidate for office, that's a campaign finance contribution that should be logged as such.
Exactly. Thank you. That was where I wanted to get with that. One more legal question, and then we'll get into the politics, which I think are probably more fun. And the legal question is, you can answer this any way you want, Elie, but why wasn't Trump charged with any of these underlying felonies? And is that a jurisdictional, how do the jurisdictional issues play out here?
Well, Don, as you well know, Merrick Garland does not take my calls. If he did take my calls, I would ask him that question because I want to know. The argument that the feds haven't charged Trump with this yet starts with Bill Barr. And we know that Bill Barr refused to let the DOJ, including his minions at the Southern District of New York, that's the federal place with jurisdiction over Manhattan. We know that Bill Barr quashed the investigation. Okay, that's on Barr's, eternal soul. What's the argument for Merrick Garland not having these charges ready to go January 2021, or at least March 2021, once he was appointed? Where's the argument for Damian Williams, the current USAO of SDNY, to not have these charges ready to go by May? Like, why weren't they ready with all of this in 2021 once they took power? Because again, we knew the scheme from 2017 and 2018. Michael Cohen, let's not forget, went to jail behind all of this, and he wasn't prosecuted by the Manhattan DA's office. Michael Cohen was prosecuted by the Southern District of New York by federal attorneys under a federal legal violation. So if it was good enough for Michael Cohen under Bill Barr, why wasn't it good enough for Donald Trump under Merrick Garland? And fundamentally, only Merrick Garland can answer that question, and I suppose he will in 6 years when he writes a book that I won't buy.
While we're all thinking of ways that Elie can spend the money he would have spent on Merrick Garland's memoir, Chris, in Washington, is there a view of this, and where do you think this might go?
Well, I think, Elie has laid it out very succinctly. It is important to keep in mind that the charges in New York are very specific to this one alleged trespass against campaign finance law. It is important to underline, as Elie already did, that no one is saying this didn't happen. Not even Trump's defenders are saying, he's innocent. They're saying that he's being railroaded for something he did because of a partisan prosecution in New York. And I think that's a really tricky case to make. I would also note that in addition to Michael Cohen being federally prosecuted, John Edwards was also federally prosecuted for a very similar arrangement arising out of his former presidential campaign. He faced 6 charges, and they were ultimately dropped on the grounds that Edwards could credibly claim he was not personally aware of the payoffs that happened to his former mistress. That is not an option for Trump in this case. It is clear that he was very much in the loop. So, you know, it will, if the case does run aground, it will be sort of on the technicalities that Elie mentioned. And I think it's also important to keep in view the bigger picture here of, you know, the case in Georgia. They literally have Donald Trump on tape conspiring to commit election fraud. And that indictment has yet to drop, but and I am as mystified as Elie is as to why Merrick Garland also didn't add that to his portfolio in March. It's a clear, you know, could not be more cut and dried. Then we have the 2 Jack Smith prosecutions, one of the Mar-a-Lago documents case, which has been going very badly for Trump in court thus far, and the January 6th prosecution, which I think is sort of the most serious, momentous, you know, should have been prosecuted long ago. But yeah, it's important to keep in mind, you know, and we were talking earlier about Leticia James's state prosecution in New York. There is a whole thicket of legal cases against Trump sort of converging at this moment. And I do actually think one of the chief reasons he is running for re-election, apart from his unappeasable megalomaniacal ego, is he wants to get elected president so that he will not be held directly accountable in court.
Can I piggyback on something Chris said just really quickly? Because a lot of times I get yelled at, I'm sure some of you listening get yelled at, oh, well, if the Democrats did it, Democrats would support the, you know, they wouldn't care. Man, look at John Edwards.
Right.
When was the last time anybody even heard from John Edwards? I swear, when was the last time John Edwards was even allowed at a Democratic national anything, right? Because he got caught paying money for his mistress and to his mistress while his wife had cancer. And even though he was able to kind of beat the rap on legal technicalities, ain't nobody out here trying to run John Edwards for public office, right? So that's how Democrats roll when we see this kind of seedy, tawdry, illegal kind of behavior. So if anybody wants to come at you with like, oh, what if a Democrat did it? We literally have a Democrat who has been kicked out of polite party conversation because of exactly this kind of scheme.
Exactly. He's a pariah, and Trump is not. They're all rushing to his defense.
And in terms of the clouds on Trump's horizon, and as our resident Georgia maven, just what do you make of the Georgia case?
You know, I like everyone else, I'm kind of mystified by why nothing has come of it. When we know that indictments, well, I mean, there are reasons there. And again, this is really more of a legal question for Elie. The political question is fascinating. I think something will happen with this. And I think we all agree that the Georgia case and the potential, Jack Smith, please God, cases are more significant than this case in New York. But here's what I want to say about why it is actually significant, regardless of what happens on the merits. I think, first of all, it was a big deal. There were, all the talking heads were like, oh, we've never indicted a former president. It's really kind of bad. I don't know. Well, we did it. It's been done. And I think it'll make it easier to do it again. And it will shut some of them up. Some of them, you can never shut them up. They were wrong about the Iraq War, and 20 years later, they're still flapping their gums. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think is interesting that is related in a way is that public opinion has shifted. ABC did a poll about, I think, 10 days apart, before the indictments and after the indictments. And they found that before the indictments, 45% of Americans said it was a good idea. And after, 50% said it was a good idea. But even more important than that, before the indictments, 40% of independents said it was a good idea, meaning most of them were like, no, don't do this. After the indictments, 54% said it was a good idea. And I think that shows you the power of action. I mean, we sit around and talk about how, opinion polls, they're bad for Democrats on this and that, and therefore we shouldn't do this or that. But in fact, sometimes you see that actually doing this or that changes the polls. So, you know, I've been meaning to write about this, but there have been other things going on. I really think it's important to pay attention to, because so often Democrats are cowards in the face of public opinion. And then finally, as a woman, I will say a lot of women are really happy that, you know, the trivializing of this as, oh, we just paid a porn star, and the mocking of Stormy Daniels and his mocking of Stormy Daniels. You know, she's ugly, the worst face. I would never be with someone like her. It echoes things he said about so many of the women he's assaulted. You know, I would never be with E. Jean Carroll, who he allegedly raped, and then he can't distinguish between her and his ex-wife Marla Maples in photos. I mean, he's a liar. He's probably a rapist. And I think a lot of women found it very satisfying that the first thing he was indicted for was not specifically paying off a porn star, but that, or a sex worker, or a brilliant woman who's turned this into, you know, an amazing business. But it's there. It's there. It's always there. She's there. And I was very happy to see that. And everything Elie said stands. It's going to be a very tough case to either make stick or to make more than a misdemeanor. You know, he'll pay some fines. But it's still, on those 3 counts, I think it's still really worth having done.
The question of where the case might go on appeal is a legal question, but in terms of it as a media circus, if it goes to trial, and if she comes to testify, because he keeps denying that, you know, never met the woman, or at least never had sex with that woman.
Right.
And as we saw with Bill Clinton, you know, once you get to people on the stand and they're testifying, I mean, does anybody, and I suppose you should probably go first on this, Elie, does anybody think this is going to get to trial? You know, however it might fare on appeal, because the trial itself could move the needle in public opinion in lots of ways.
Yeah, but the trial ain't happening until he's arguably already president again, right? Like, this is right. The time from where we are to an actual trial is very long. And that's without even counting all of the appeals that we know Trump is going to make. I mean, think about it this way. The next scheduled court date is December 4th, right, of 2023. So the next time he even has to talk about this stuff, we're already on the precipice of the primary season starting, and that's without any appeal, that's without any delay, that's without anything, right? So it's going to be a very long time before we get to trial. And then at trial, I don't think Stormy will have to testify, because at trial, what he will argue, and he probably won't take the stand, is that he had no intent to defraud. And Bragg is going to have the documents and the evidence and the whatever, but he's going to have a credible argument that he had no intent to defraud, and he'll be able to make that argument through various other, you know, paid sycophants who will take the stand in his defense, right? Michael Cohen will probably take the stand, and that might be like extremely damaging to him. But I mean, we're trying to, it's like trying to hit a moving target a year and a half later. What I will say, Don, to your media circus point, though, is that we have already seen the mainstream media, the corporate media, make all of the mistakes that it did to create Trump in the first place again, right? We had live 24/7 coverage of the plane sitting on the tarmac as if Trump was about to like fly to the moon to stand trial. All right, like this is the kind of, we had wall to wall coverage of Trump. Is he walking into the? Is he walking out? Do we have a? Is he gonna say hi? Say hi to me, Mr. Trump. Say hi. Right. That's the level of idiocy that the regular media did throughout this case. And we're going to see that kind of again and again and again. And that has its own kind of like damaging, corrosive effect on our politics, and helps all of that, I think, ultimately helps Trump in his quest to be reelected, because Trump's entire point is to keep himself as the center of all attention. But that's not a legal failing. That's not a reason to not hold him accountable legally. That's a reason to hold the media accountable for how it creates Trump.
But okay,
Yeah,
so
the cable coverage of the run up to Trump's arraignment seemed more like a Richard Scarry documentary. Here's a plane and here's a motorcade going down to the Manhattan courthouse. It literally had no news value, and I think that is
Well, it has.
so disappointing in all of this is we aren't seeing the kind of clear explanation that Elie kicked off this podcast with of, okay, here's what's being alleged, here are the consequences, here are the other precedents. Yeah, you are not going to get that. And that, Trump reportedly was disappointed he didn't get a mugshot because he was going to fundraise off it. And then he went on ahead and Photoshopped one anyway. So we know what that is all about, right? They're going to keep putting him forward as the Easter week martyr of the MAGA movement. So yeah, the media has to get a lot better about all of this fast. And I'm not,
Don't hold your breath for that. I mean, I share your dismay, but I also think that the media, and I apologize for this metaphor. The media is the thirsty man in the bar who hasn't had a drink in 4 years and suddenly sees the glass is glistening.
yeah, except Trump hasn't gone anywhere over this time.
Right.
I don't think that's an excuse either. I think they're just wired to create context-free spectacle, and Trump serves it up time and again.
I'm wondering how you think Democrats, in particular the Biden administration, ought to play this. And we can bring Merrick Garland in or not, but this is, as long as this is a duet between Trump and the media, that's only going to help Trump. So what do the Democrats do to interrupt?
Although, I've talked to people in DC. Oh, I'm sorry, Joan, go ahead.
Well, I just don't know that it only helps Trump. And I think the Biden administration is handling it just fine. They're letting it play out. We can criticize what they're doing, what they're not doing, what they're emphasizing, but I don't think that there's any reason for him to weigh in on this, be present on this, send Kamala Harris out to talk about this. There are plenty other Republican outrages that they need to be addressing, as well as their own selling their own priorities and accomplishing some more things that I just think that they should just keep their distance and let this happen.
Okay, that's your advice.
Yeah.
No, I'm curious. Chris, do you agree?
In large part, yeah. I mean, I think, I've talked to some people in DC who are sanguine Democrats who are saying, as long as we're talking about Trump's legal woes and rehashing the Stormy Daniels case, et cetera, no one's talking about, whether Joe Biden is up to the job of being president.
That's good for Joe Biden, actually.
That's what Democrats
that's their point.
are saying. Yeah. And I think it's also, to Joan's point, the other independent poll return that I saw that was really striking was that after the arraignment, 62% of independent voters said that they felt it was improper for Trump to be continuing to run for president while indicted. So I don't, this all plays to the MAGA base in a way that we all know in nauseating detail, right? But the presidential election ultimately isn't going to be about that. And, Biden and the Democrats are well aware of that. I do think, what's regrettable is that Biden did run in 2020 as the decent, humane, let the system work alternative to Trump, and then very quickly punted on all this, when the question of serious criminal prosecutions arose. So
that's both a legal and a political question, which is
right.
If as the let the system work candidate, and you want to demonstrate the competence of an administration to address public issues, isn't accountability a public issue? And what is it?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And we're seeing, this is a little bit off topic, we're seeing Democrats again kind of fumble the accountability ball in the Clarence Thomas Harlan Crow case, where Dick Durbin, who's chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, is saying, oh, let's let the Supreme Court investigate itself over this, which is like, we've run that experiment, right?
Or else we might do something, which everybody knows we won't do anything.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So I do think there's this weird paradox where the Democrats have for a long time, in my view, fetishized procedural legal justice. We saw it all during the Bob Mueller case. It spiked CNN or MSNBC's ratings for 2 years. There was all this breathless, analysis of, this is going to be the moment where the Trump administration is finally, made to answer for its many, bad actions and improprieties. And it didn't happen. We can talk about the politics of why that didn't happen. But, I would be lying if I were to say, I do feel there is a certain Mueller investigation hangover factor with all of the intense, anticipation of this. I think Elie is right. You just let these charges be what they are. It's not the crime of the century in this case. It is still a crime, as, the John Edwards and Michael Cohen precedents show us. But I think it is, there is this problem of Democrats wanting the legal system to do ultimately the work of politics. And one of the former federal prosecutors I interviewed about Trump's indictment said, like, if the justice goal here is to see Donald Trump behind bars, the best way to ensure that happens is to make sure he is not elected president in 2024. And I think that, as we continue to follow the media coverage and all the sound and fury, I think it's really important to have that very clearly in mind as the prime directive.
Let's focus on that for a minute, and then we've got a lot of great questions from the audience. So you've got this indictment, you've got an impending, we hope, Georgia indictment. You've hopefully got something from Jack Smith before the end of the first Biden term. What happens? What happens to any of these processes, A, if Trump is elected president, and B, if he's not elected president?
The A is easy to answer. Trump will pardon himself. I think Rick DeSantis, if he is elected, will pardon Trump. That is, again, I think that one of the main reasons Trump is running. B, Elie, over to you.
Yeah.
I'll do a plug for the Nation Cruise, right? On the Nation Cruise, I made a bet with Sasha that Trump wouldn't be charged by anybody, including Jack Smith, before the Ides of March. And the Ides of March was my little drop dead date for when you could possibly hope to go from charges to a trial before Trump becomes the Republican nominee. And Sasha lost. He's going to owe me dinner next time that we meet up, right? Like that we are already past the point where Trump can reasonably be held accountable until he is before the Republican National Convention. And that's my kind of line for, like, look, I want to get Trump as much as the next guy. I do not think that politics should make you above the law, blah, blah, blah. It is hard. It is hard to think how you can run a trial against a person who is a major party candidate, not just candidate, the major party nominee for the presidency months before that election. That's just, how do you even select a jury, right? To sit impartially in judgment of of that kind of thing. Wouldn't, in that situation, every presidential campaign ad be jury tampering? Like, it's just like it just becomes super difficult, right? So I think you can prosecute him and bring him to trial and put him in jail right up until the point where he's the actual nominee for his party. But once it is, I don't see how you get it done. And I think, to get back to Chris's earlier point, Merrick Garland doesn't see it either. I have gone from believing Merrick Garland is just incompetent to believing that he's an incompetent coward, to now we're edging closer to he's an incompetent coward who's complicit in helping Trump get off the hook. Because if you don't charge him by now, there's no way you can charge him, I believe. There's no way you can bring him to trial, I believe, before he's the nominee. And so Trump has, in a more important way, Trump has already gotten away with it, because his entire goal from the coup to now has just been to put himself back in the position where he could run for president again. And that has succeeded. So everything else that we're talking about is now in the category of we're going to have to beat Trump again at the polls, and then we'll see if any of these legal processes survive against him.
Well, I rarely disagree, and I don't disagree with Elie because neither of us know what's going to happen. But I think that, I have no faith in Merrick Garland. Let's just say that. But I think, let's assume I have some faith in Fanny Willis. If he's indicted on, really serious much more serious charges, as well as perhaps something from Jack Smith, I think those things change the equation a lot. He may still be the nominee, but I don't think he becomes president. I'm sorry. We beat him once and we can beat him again, especially if he's been indicted on, 74 felony counts and, state, federal, local, dog catcher, New York sewer department violations. I think that will matter. And I'm not saying we don't know. None of that may happen. And that would be super disappointing. I won't swear, but, if that happens, I think it hugely damages him. And then he does face the music proverbially, and then he can be tried and he, God willing, is convicted.
But now we're in the realm of politics, because there's no legal reason once he's indicted that he can't continually be tried. There's nothing in the criminal law that has a little asterisk that says, except when somebody's running for president.
He can be charged. He can run for president from jail. He can constitutionally, he can be president from jail.
Yeah.
That's probably harder because he can pardon himself, but he can
Not for state crimes.
jail because Debs did it. It's been done before, so we know it can be done. On the other hand, it does sound, Joan, like you think that to have a political effect, these indictments have to come before he's the nominee, not after he's the nominee.
Well, I think they can come before. I mean, I kind of defer to Elie. If they don't even indict him before, it's hard to see them indicting him after. But you guys, it's April. We've got more than, am I missing? Did I miss a year here? We've got more than a year before the Republican convention. So, if Fanny Willis can't make this a case, if Jack Smith can't make any cases, we're screwed. But there's every reason to think that they can in the next, 15.
Yeah, I think that if we're talking about indictments, they have enough time to still indict. I'm saying they don't have enough time to credibly bring him to trial. I think Jack Smith is going to indict for something, just on the theory of Jack Smith needs to justify his existence. See, one of the things that happens in law enforcement a lot is that when they spend a lot of time investigating you, they almost have to, and this is me kind of being a defense lawyer right now, but once they spend a lot of time investigating you, they almost have to indict you for something to justify all of the resources and effort and time that went into the investigation, right? It's like when the cop pulls you over, he's gonna give you a ticket for something because he has to justify pulling you over in the first place, at least if you're black. So I think Jack Smith will indict Trump for something simply to justify his existence, right? Whether or not that's something that I think we all want to see on January 6th, or a serious kind of espionage level charge, that remains to be seen. But I think Jack Smith will do something.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to some questions from the audience. And here's one from Gail McEvilly. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. But it's a question that I'm sure has occurred to lots of people, which is, why has Trump not been barred from running for elected office, given, January 6th and everything else?
Because he wasn't convicted. When he was impeached, he wasn't convicted. That was the one thing they could have done. Mitch McConnell could have done that. As much as he bitches about Donald Trump screwing up his plans to be Senate Majority Leader, they didn't convict him. If they had, he couldn't run. There's nothing else they can do, as far as I know. Elie.
Nope, Joan, that's exactly right. I mean, it's even the idea that a conviction on the impeachment charges would have barred him from running even that is kind of legally untested, right? Like
Right.
you're trying to do a bank shot in off the 14th Amendment, Section 3, which is honestly, folks, a clause of the 14th Amendment, and I am a 14th Amendmentist, clause of the 14th Amendment that I hadn't even heard of until like 2018. Like, so even that argument was difficult, but that was the only argument that you ever had to stop him from running from office. There's no other mechanism that stops a person from doing that.
Here's a question from Jordan Weltman, which is, why do you have faith in, and it's to Joan particularly, although the rest of you are welcome to weigh in. Why do you have faith in Fanny Willis when it took a year after we all heard the phone call to even convene a special grand jury?
Just because of the reporting about what she's up to. I don't know. I don't know her personally. It sounds like they've done a lot of hard, great work. I'm not alone in thinking that, but I don't have any special information. Maybe it's wishful thinking. I don't know.
And then what do we think that, this is from Lisa, what do we think the indictment means for the financial fraud charges filed in New York State earlier this year, or last year, actually?
Yeah, this is the Leticia James investigation that we were talking about off camera earlier. Look, Leticia James is a dedicated public servant. She is moving forward with, I think, all deliberate speed to really start to unpack the alleged financial crimes of the Trump organization, right? Again, this arguably is work that should have been done in New York State in the 90s, right? Like if
Right.
somebody, if Elliot Spitzer had been more interested in doing this than doing whatever he's doing with prostitutes, maybe we never even be in a Trump situation, right? Like there have been opportunities to do this in the past. Leticia James is finally doing it. All of it is fines. And I think that one of the things that we haven't kind of brought up on this webinar yet is that the Alvin Bragg charges, fines. The Leticia James charges, fines. Like, actually, the espionage charge, depending on how he does it, fines. Like, actually getting Trump in the pokey, right? The only way you're doing that is Fanny Willis in Georgia with election fraud, or if Jack Smith really comes after something, coup, conspiracy, January 6th, right? Everything else, 34 Class E felonies, fine. Like, you don't go to jail first time, and this is gonna rankle some people the wrong way. Trust me, it bothers me too. But Trump would be a first-time, non-violent, elderly offender. We generally do not send 76-year-old people to jail for financial crimes when it's the first offense. We just don't.
So there's no law and order.
It's true. I mean, yeah. You can view, especially, the Leticia James and Alvin Bragg prosecutions as downstream from a system-wide failure to effectively punish white-collar crime. That is a whole other issue, but it is what allowed Donald Trump to, metastasize all prior to his career in national politics.
That's, for those of you who are historically minded, this reminds me of a wonderful series that Bob Sherrill did in The Nation in the 1980s on bribery, which essentially pointed out that every prosecution of bribery is an elective prosecution. That bribery is not the kind of crime that gets into the evening news and then there's a clamor for justice. Normally, bribery is when you decide to go after somebody, and who you decide to go after is invariably a political decision. But while we're talking about politics, this is a question from Vincent, and it's for anybody who wants it, although I suppose in the first instance, maybe Chris and Joan. Do you see the GOP reacting to Trump's indictment in any way that hurts him? Actually, this is also from Annie L. Is there any way this indictment actually hurts Trump politically rather than helps him? We've talked.
Oh, go ahead.
The Bragg indictment.
Yeah.
No, I mean, they've all come out. They all have the same talking points. Soros-backed radical, animal DA in a crime-ridden city who's letting who's letting real criminals walk free. They're all, even the people who are running against him. That's what they're saying. So no, this has not dented him with Republican leaders, and not much with Republican voters from the polls I've seen, maybe a couple points, which really don't matter. So no.
Yeah, I totally agree with Joan. The only thing I would add is an important asterisk is I do think it will hurt the GOP. I
Yes.
think, having it's not, I don't care what they say, and, all the talking points are clearly intended to distract attention and say, hey, look over there. But it is just a bad look to have a standard bearer for your political party who has been arraigned for a crime. And especially with, it is also important to remember that the GOP lags in national voter registration. So therefore the independent vote is critical to winning a national election. And as we were saying earlier, independents aren't liking the way this looks.
I've written about this in the latest print issue from The Nation, but I just want to put a pin in the fact that it is insane that the GOP is attacking the indictment in this way and Trump is attacking the indictment in this way when, as I said, he's got legitimate legal defenses, right? Like
Right.
on Earth 2, where Republicans are still normal, the talking point from the GOP is bring it on. Bring it on. I did nothing wrong. And now we're going to have a whole process and you can take all of the shots you want and the process will vindicate me that I did nothing wrong. Like that would actually be the winning argument if you were a normal conservative Republican person who believed in like the law and democracy and the rule of law being applied fairly and equally to everybody. You would welcome it. Oh, look, I am running to be president, but I am not above the law. I will subject myself to any legal strategy that you have against me because I know that
No.
that's a campaign ad, right? But no, it's got to be like, Bragg is being controlled by Soros and really mean to me. Like, that's because of the warping, the weirding that Trump has done to our entire politics. People don't even see that a normal politician would be handling this entirely differently than Trump and the entire sycophantic Republican structure.
Okay. So here's a question about which world we're on, World 1 or World 2. I love the idea that we're all in this little bizarro world jar. The solitude for you, DC.
Very believable.
From Maureen Miller, which is, and I'm thinking partly about John Edwards and partly about Bill Clinton, who didn't exactly take the bring it on approach, but was closer to it certainly than Trump is. Do Democrats shun indicted candidates because it makes the party look bad or uncouth, or because the activities are illegal? And I think here, one can think about John Edwards, but also about Bill Clinton, and whether a perjury indictment would have made any difference.
I think it's sort of a both and. It is politically inexpedient to have standard bearers who are, and in all these cases, we are basically talking about the abuse of power to create a sexual relationship or to cover up a sexual relationship. And happily for the Democratic Party, that does not play well with the base. So they are, I think, reined in more by political concerns. But I would also hope there is, though I will say, I actually, from the left, basically supported the Clinton impeachment in the late 90s and got a lot of blowback for it.
Well, as Eleanor reminds me, you wrote a whole book about presidents getting a pass.
Well, no, not a book. It's just my column about the Ford pardon, which has created, in my view, a world 2, where presidents have existed for the past 50 years in a state of kind of beyond legal accountability and of sort of pure impunity. And it's a perverse result of, I don't think it was Gerald Ford's intention when he pardoned Nixon to create that world.
He
But
did.
by letting, and it's also going back to Elie's original statement, it's worth remembering that a lot of the Watergate charges were these kind of what we now kind of cynically view as ticky-tacky campaign finance abuses. And they were very serious crimes. They were part of a, Nixon converted his White House into a rolling political criminal conspiracy. And Ford, out of what I think of a misguided view that the Republic couldn't really stand having a president criminally tried and convicted, gave a very sweeping pardon to Nixon for any crimes he committed or would commit. It's the wording is kind of insane.
Yeah.
And I think it's a pretty direct line from that to the failure to effectively hold the Reagan administration accountable in Iran-Contra, to the OLC memo in the Bush White House authorizing all kinds of horrible executive impunity in matters like torture that should never have been countenanced, to what we're dealing with today. I think it's healthy in something that we regard as a formal democracy to hold the executive to a higher standard, which is why I supported Clinton's impeachment.
So this is a counterfactual that I usually only do a couple of drinks in, but it's an interesting one, right? Like you want to talk about different Earths. Somewhere in the multiverse, there is an Earth where Bill Clinton comes out and says, "In fact, I did have sex with that woman,
Right.
and it was good." And the world changes. Clinton doesn't get impeached, number one, right? He probably weathers that storm, right? Al Gore is probably president because he doesn't make the ridiculous decision to run away from Bill Clinton in 2000. He probably wins Florida. He's probably president, which means we probably don't get into a war in Afghanistan or Iraq, which means Barack Obama is like the most popular US senator from Illinois as opposed to the first black president, which means Hillary Clinton dumps Bill Clinton.
I was going to say that.
Right? Leaves him, becomes senator from New York, and probably then succeeds after George Bush beats Al Gore as a one-term president, probably then romps to the... It's a different world if Bill Clinton just admits what he did. And in a post-Trump world, what I imagine is going to happen is actually more, and this is me being really naive or hopeful, but one of the things that Trump has shown is that just say it. Right now, Trump doesn't lie. The bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger the lie, the better it is for Donald Trump. But you can imagine a future politician getting caught in a sex scandal, deciding just to, yes, I did it, and move on. Like, what are you going to do? Trump has coarsened us perhaps to the point where that's at least a more viable political strategy. So there are lots of spinning counterfactuals that can happen if Bill Clinton just tells the truth.
I very much look forward to the day when the United States political system responds to sex scandals like the French political system. I'm not holding my breath. Meanwhile, in the universe that we're stuck in, where none of Elie's wonderful counterfactuals happened, Chuck Carlson asked a question that a lot of pundits have been asking also, and which I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on, which is the fact that we've made it easier to indict a former president. Is that a long-term negative for the US, considering, for example, the way the right wing has shown itself willing to use even school board elections? Clinton's still alive. Biden will be a former president someday. Do we think that once that line has been crossed, weaponization of indictments against former presidents is just something we're going to have to live with from now on?
You guys, it's kind of like the argument about the filibuster. Oh, well, if we do this, then Mitch McConnell, then they'll turn around and screw up. They're going to do it anyway. If Mitch becomes majority leader, there will be no filibuster anymore. This is what they do. So they will indict future Democrats if they have the power. Whatever Democrats did to Trump. I mean, I just think that is not, that's just the kind of thing that we say because we're scared, but we also care about the facts. But they're weaponizing everything. I mean, the fact that they're weaponizing the school boards to the extent and to the evil and cruel extent that they are is just an example. They'll indict Barack Obama if they have a chance. I mean, and they would have done.
They would have. If
Yeah.
Barack Obama committed a crime, promise you, if Barack Obama paid off a porn star, they would be indicting him for something.
I think if Barack Obama had gone too fast in his carriage, like U.S. he'd have had
Absolutely.
If Barack Obama had a Pornhub account, they would indict him for something.
Exactly. This doesn't go directly to that question, but again, it's a bit of a asterisk. But in the wake of the Trump indictment, we saw a lot of pundit hand-wringing about, oh, we're going to become like a banana republic. You know, the opposition will automatically try and charge and weaponize the legal system. And this was one of the many moments when I was shouting profanities on my television saying, like, we became a banana republic on January 6th. There was a coup attempt and it is still being unpunished. That's the banana republic drift I am far more worried about. As Joan says, of course, you know, remember the Benghazi hearings? Like,
Right.
yes, yeah, the Republicans will use, and Jim Jordan is literally doing it now at the Bragg indictment, right? He's mounting an insane Judiciary Committee inquiry into Alvin Bragg as a result of this. Yes, that will happen. And yes, it is disconcerting. And it's also worth noting that the school board strategy has, fingers crossed, proved to be a big electoral flop for the GOP.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, I'm not in any way saying that's been good for the country or for the many people hurt by the school inquisitions, but it is worth noting. There are, I hope, you know, there is a Maginot line of sanity that the American electorate is still able, I think, to recognize with help.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there, Chris, because you're right. They are mainly losing these school board fights, but they're winning even in places that have liberal school boards, because especially in Florida, DeSantis's Department of Education has its own set of powers, and they're going in. That's how they're going in, and they're snatching off, you know, Roberto Clemente books off shelves, and, you know, dim sum soup or whatever, you know, all these really innocuous books, as well as challenging books that kids should read anyway. So they're doing that even though they lose school board results. So they'll do everything. They'll do anything. They'll do everything.
Right.
we get too grim. I have a couple of questions from listeners. One is from Glenn Slocum, who asks, is there not a solution to a Republican majority House, i.e. the DOJ investigates and indicts the representatives who participated in January 6th? So, you know, that's one thought, but I guess what I'm wanting to hear from all of you, if you have them, are the kind of, we're on diverging timelines, right? There was a universe in which all of Elie's things happened. There's a universe in which we're still in the same world where U.S. Grant was subject to the same laws as anybody else. How do we get back to a world where presidents are actually accountable? What are the steps? What would you like to see happen given where we are? And I'm going to wait for you to go last on Elie, on this one, Elie, because you've been the most persuasively pessimistic. So
I will say that I think, you know, it is healthy to have Trump indicted and arraigned on these charges. I think that is a really important first step to, you know, undoing at least some of the damage in the wake of the Ford-Nixon pardon. And, you know, the founders of the Constitution put the national legislature first. I'm not crazy about the way the national legislature has been doing its job, but that I do think we need a return to a separation of powers in which Congress can do more legitimate oversight, and the executive is not the imperial presidency that we've lived under ever since the Cold War. It is possible to get there, but it is, again, a matter of politics and organizing and will.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I agree with Chris entirely. I would also like to see the Department of Justice do more against the Congress members who did collude in plotting January 6th than the ones who asked for pardons. They didn't do anything wrong, but they just wanted pardons anyway, just in case. There's a whole lot of evidence that a bunch of them were involved in the
Scott Perry alone.
Scott Perry, for sure, Scott Perry.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those two things together, they're different branches, but they would do a lot to write this. And I don't feel that optimistic about that, but the Trump indictment was a first step, and more indictments will be more steps.
The Constitution imagines that the way to hold former presidents, public officials accountable is to make them former public officials, right? That's what's supposed to happen. We're supposed to, oh, look, that person did something wrong. We won't vote for him. And the thing that has tripped that up has been the Republican Party's descent into authoritarianism, right? Because this is a Republican Party problem, because it is the Republicans who are supposed to kind of police their own and kick these bad people out of their party and therefore out of public life, and they won't do that. So when you talk about like what the real fix is, as much as I believe that Merrick Garland has been a failure and that there needs to be more DOJ oversight and whatever, the real fix is stopping gerrymandering. Yep. And abolishing the Electoral College. The real fix is taking away the things that Republicans use to exert minority control over the majority of the population, taking those things away and having people vote the bad guys out. It is the classic Churchillian, the solution to the ills of democracy is more democracy. That's how you actually fix it.
Yeah. And the order presumably is vote the bad guys out when you can, but also push hard to change the rules
when you have the power.
To fix the rules, right? To recenter the rules and what the rules were supposed to be.
Right.
Exactly.
And where does that leave, non-politicians, ordinary nation subscribers and readers? What do we do? What do they do?
Come on the boat.
Stay fired up.
I mean, look, I think what I would imagine there were quite a lot of nation readers in Tennessee last week, right? Who were joining hands and locking hands with the Justins and whatever, and like those are the small d democratic things that we have to do to help. We have to show our support, and we have to show up, and we have to show out. When there is an opportunity to exert electoral will, we have to demand that electoral will is exerted.
Exactly. March, walk, run.
Sorry, go ahead.
March, walk, run, vote.
Vote, donate.
Donate.
Yeah. And organize. Always organize.
Right.
Well, for those who want to see this thing happening and germinating, we've just posted a link to Joan's wonderful piece about Nashville, where people are doing all those things and where it is having an effect. So, let us not despair.
No.
Here's a question from Katha Pollitt, and I good to see you on this, Katha. A late grenade in this party. We keep doing the same thing, trying to win the white working class, but it doesn't work. Why do you think that is? Joan, this is, I think your
Who's the we?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know what Kath is talking about, but I think there's been a lot, somewhat less emphasis, correctly. I think there's been a realization that a lot of the Trump vote was motivated not by economic insecurity, even among those who are economically insecure, but by racism and misogyny. And so, I think the Democrats have been much better about centering their actual base and, right now centering what's happening in Tennessee. There are still cases to be made and people are making them. And sometimes I agree and sometimes I don't, that there are some white working class folks to be gotten at the margins, but it's the margins. So I don't really feel there's this big, I think a lot of the people who have preached that have been kind of marginalized, and those who preached it, it hasn't turned out to work. So, a lot of us have moved on.
Have they been marginalized though? Because like I look at the new White House chief of staff and I'm like,
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I mean,
I don't think anyone would mistake Zients for a horny-handed son of toil.
well, exactly. I mean, you know,
He's a corporate executive who
exactly. He's
you know,
not out there, you know, yes, he's not making it.
and you know, the other thing that it's not an electoral strategy, but I will say the Biden administration has actually enacted a number of policies to support American workers, including, you know, under the
Inflation Reduction Act.
yes, thank you. The Inflation Reduction Act, you know, trying to ensure that American companies are suppliers. And, you know, so it's another one of these classic things where I think a both and solution is necessary. Like, you don't, first of all, as Joan was saying, most of Trump supporters were actually way north of the white working class in terms of socioeconomic standing. It's true that the first of all, we have this really bad metric in
Non-college.
yeah, the non-college educated white vote still is trending hard right, definitely. And a lot of that is the evangelical community, which is another big problem we don't have time to get into here. But in terms of, you know, what's being materially done, we're in an economy of near full employment right now, and inflation appears to be abating. You know, these conditions are actually classic, what should be a Democratic Party coalition, you know, material is there. So again, I think we just need to get our head out of the old narrative, which was always wrong and driven by the mainstream media, where there were, you know, I'm from Iowa, and the number of stupid New York Times reports where they parachute someone into my hometown to say, oh, this Trump supporter is still a Trump supporter. Like, you know, what the hell?
All right, before we get too far down into this, I want to pick up on your last point about both and, because that's something that we've been talking about for at least for a long time in this magazine and for a long time in this discussion, which is both and. We've got to both vote for the people we support. We've got to vote the people we don't support out of office. We've got to stay organized. We've got to stay activated and active. And, you know, I think conversations like today are a great way to get people to wake up and to stay active and to stay alert. If you want to hear more of this kind of conversation or discussion of these kind of issues, I would encourage all of you to keep visiting www.thenation.com. Meanwhile, I'm going to thank Gia Del Prado and Eleanor Buchanan and Peter Rothberg for putting this together, and for Katrina vanden Heuvel, as always, for being a gracious and eloquent host. And most of all, our wonderful panelists, Joan Walsh, Chris Lehmann, and Elie Mystal. You are always a pleasure to listen to and talk with, and it's been great to be with you today. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay there and stay on thenation.com. And if you really want an immersion, come on the cruise, and then you can watch Sasha Chomsky take Elie Mystal to dinner. Take care, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.